If only I'd known what was happening behind the smiles, I might have seen the cracks before they shattered my world. But on that bright golden afternoon, all I could see was happiness. My brother, Ethan, was finally marrying the woman he'd loved for years, and our family was gathered in a way we hadn't been since childhood. The air was thick with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the scent of roses that lined the aisle. I remember thinking, as I watched Ethan at the altar, that this was the kind of day you wanted to bottle up and keep forever. I'd spent weeks helping my mother with the preparations, fussing over every detail, determined that nothing would go wrong. My husband, Mark, had been supportive, if a little distracted. I chalked it up to work stress he'd been putting in long hours at the office, and I was grateful he'd managed to take time off for the wedding. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his arm warm around my waist as we posed for photos. I felt lucky, proud to be part of such a beautiful family, proud to be his wife. The ceremony was perfect. The bride, Olivia, glowed in her lace gown, her eyes never leaving Ethan's. I'd always liked Olivia. She was warm, funny, and seemed to adore my brother. As they exchanged vows, I caught Mark's eye and smiled, squeezing his hand. He smiled back, but there was something in his gaze I couldn't quite place. A flicker of distraction, maybe, or nerves. I brushed it off. Weddings made everyone emotional. After the ceremony, the reception unfolded in a blur of music and dancing. The ballroom sparkled with fairy lights, and the tables overflowed with flowers and laughter. I floated from group to group, catching up with cousins I hadn't seen in years, basking in the glow of family. Mark was never far from my side, but I noticed he seemed restless, checking his phone more than usual. At one point, I found him standing alone on the terrace, staring out at the gardens. When I asked if he was all right, he smiled and said he was just tired. I believed him. As the evening wore on, I watched Ethan and Olivia move through the crowd, radiant and inseparable. Their first dance was a swirl of white and navy, their faces alight with joy. I felt a pang of envy, remembering the early days of my own marriage, when everything felt new and possible. Mark and I had been together for 8 years, and though we'd had our share of ups and downs, I thought we were solid. I thought I knew him. There were moments, though, that didn't quite fit. I caught Mark and Olivia in conversation by the bar, their heads bent close together. They laughed at something, and Olivia touched his arm lightly. It was nothing, I told myself. Olivia was friendly with everyone, and Mark was just being polite. Still, a tiny seed of doubt took root in my mind, quickly smothered by the next toast, the next dance, the next wave of celebration. My mother pulled me aside to admire the cake, her eyes shining with pride. "You did so much for this wedding, sweetheart," she said, hugging me. "Your brother is lucky to have you." I smiled, feeling a rush of warmth. Family meant everything to me. I'd always been the one to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to make sure everyone was happy. It was a role I cherished, even if it sometimes felt heavy. Later, as the night deepened and the music grew louder, I found myself alone at our table, watching Mark and Olivia dance together. It was the kind of dance you'd expect between in-laws, playful, light-hearted. But as I watched, I noticed the way Mark's hand lingered at her waist, the way Olivia's laughter seemed a little too bright. I shook my head, embarrassed by my own jealousy. This was my brother's wedding, and I refused to let insecurity ruin it. Still, the feeling wouldn't quite leave me. I tried to distract myself, chatting with friends, sipping champagne, but my eyes kept drifting back to Mark and Olivia. At one point, I saw them slip out onto the terrace together. My heart thudded, but I told myself they were probably just getting some air. After all, it was a warm night and the ballroom was crowded. I decided to let it go. I told myself I was being silly, that I was reading too much into innocent moments. I reminded myself of all the reasons I trusted Mark, all the years we'd built together. I focused on Ethan's happiness, on the way he looked at Olivia as if she were the only person in the world. I told myself that love like that was real, that it could last. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. There was a tension in the air, a current running beneath the laughter and music. I caught Mark glancing at Olivia when he thought no one was looking, and once I saw Olivia quickly look away when I approached. I tried to ignore it, to lose myself in the celebration, but the unease grew with every passing hour. When the time came for the bouquet toss, Olivia beckoned me over, insisting I join the single women on the dance floor. I laughed, protesting that I was happily married, but she pulled me in anyway. As the bouquet sailed through the air, I caught Mark watching us, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I felt exposed, as if everyone could see the doubts swirling inside me. The night ended with sparklers and goodbyes, Ethan and Olivia driving off into their new life together. Mark and I walked back to our hotel room in silence, the magic of the evening fading into exhaustion. I told myself I was just tired, that tomorrow everything would feel normal again. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I replayed the day in my mind, searching for reassurance, for proof that my fears were unfounded. I wanted to believe that the wedding had been perfect, that my family was whole, that my marriage was safe. If only I'd known what was happening behind the smiles. If only I'd trusted my instincts. Because in the days that followed, everything I thought I knew would be called into question, and the truth would be far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Family has always been the anchor in my life, the thing I clung to when the world felt uncertain. Growing up, Ethan and I were inseparable partners in mischief, confidants in secrets, each other's fiercest protectors. Our parents worked long hours, so we learned early to rely on each other, inventing games in the backyard, whispering late into the night about our dreams and fears. Even as adults, that bond never faded. When Ethan called, I answered. When he hurt, I felt it. His happiness was my happiness, and I would have done anything to see him smile. It was that closeness that made his wedding feel so monumental, not just for him, but for all of us. I wanted everything to be perfect, to give him the kind of day he deserved. I threw myself into planning, organizing, smoothing over every little hiccup. Mark teased me about my obsession with the details, but I could tell he admired my dedication. Or at least he used to. Lately, things between Mark and me had felt off. It was hard to pinpoint exactly when the distance began. Maybe it was after his last promotion, when late nights at the office became the norm and our conversations grew shorter, more practical. We still shared a bed, still went through the motions of married life, but there was a chill beneath the surface, a sense that we were drifting in different directions. I tried to ignore it, to believe it was just a phase, but the silence between us grew heavier with each passing week. I remember one night, a few months before the wedding, when I found Mark sitting alone in the dark, staring at his phone. He jumped when I entered the room, quickly locking the screen. I laughed it off, teasing him about his secret life, but he just smiled tightly and changed the subject. I told myself it was nothing, that everyone deserved a little privacy. But the seed of doubt was planted. Ethan, on the other hand, was a constant source of light. He called me every week, sometimes just to share a funny story or ask for advice about Olivia. He was nervous about the wedding, worried about blending families, about living up to expectations. I reassured him, reminding him of all the ways he'd always been enough. We reminisced about our childhood, about the treehouse we'd built together, the promises we'd made to always have each other's backs. I felt proud of the man he'd become and grateful that our bond had survived the storms of adulthood. Olivia fit into our family easily, or so it seemed. She was charming, attentive, always quick with a compliment. My parents adored her, and Ethan was clearly smitten. I wanted to like her, to welcome her as a sister, but there was a part of me that held back. Maybe it was jealousy, or maybe it was the way she sometimes looked at Mark when she thought I wasn't watching. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just projecting my own insecurities onto her. Still, there were moments that nagged at me. Like the time I caught Mark and Olivia laughing together in the kitchen, their heads bent close over a shared joke. Or the way Mark seemed to light up when Olivia entered the room, his eyes following her with a kind of intensity I hadn't seen in years. I tried to brush it off, to remind myself that Mark was friendly with everyone, that Olivia was just trying to fit in. But the doubts lingered, growing louder in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. Our marriage had always been built on trust, or so I believed. We'd weathered our share of storms, job losses, family illnesses, the slow erosion of routine, but we'd always found our way back to each other. I wanted to believe that this was just another rough patch, that we'd come out stronger on the other side. But as the wedding approached, I found myself questioning everything. Why did Mark seem so distant? Why did he spend so much time on his phone, or disappear for hours without explanation? Why did I feel like a stranger in my own home? I tried to talk to him about it, to bridge the gap that had opened between us. He always reassured me, told me I was overthinking things, that work was just stressful. He promised that things would get better after the wedding, that we'd take a trip, reconnect, find our way back to each other. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, but the red flags kept waving. There was the night he came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. The text messages he quickly deleted, the sudden interest in his appearance, the way he seemed to flinch when I reached for his phone. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Ethan noticed the tension too. He asked me if everything was all right, if I was happy. I lied, telling him that I was just tired, that wedding planning was stressful. He hugged me, told me he loved me, that he was always there if I needed to talk. I almost told him the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to ruin his happiness. Not when he was on the brink of starting a new life. Looking back, I wonder if I should have trusted my instincts, if I should have confronted Mark sooner. Maybe I could have stopped what was coming, or at least prepared myself for the fallout. But I was so desperate to believe in the life we'd built, in the family I'd worked so hard to hold together. As the wedding day drew closer, the cracks in my marriage grew harder to ignore. Mark was more distant than ever, and Olivia seemed to be everywhere I turned. I tried to focus on Ethan, on making his day perfect, but the doubts gnawed at me, whispering that something was terribly wrong. Was I imagining things, or was something truly wrong? The question haunted me, echoing in the quiet spaces between laughter and celebration, growing louder with every passing day. And soon, I would have my answer, one that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the people I trusted most. Weddings are supposed to be about beginnings, new promises, new families, new hope. That's what I kept telling myself as the reception carried on, the ballroom pulsing with music and laughter. I tried to lose myself in the celebration, to let the joy of the day drown out the doubts that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I danced with my father, toasted with my mother, and watched Ethan and Olivia swirl across the floor, radiant in their happiness. For a few precious hours, I almost believed everything was as perfect as it seemed. But the feeling of unease never quite left me. It clung to the edges of my mind, a shadow that grew longer as the night wore on. Mark was nowhere to be seen. I told myself he was probably catching up with friends or helping Ethan with some last-minute detail, but the excuses felt thin. I scanned the room, searching for his familiar face, but he was gone. I wandered out onto the terrace, the cool night air a relief after the heat of the ballroom. The gardens were lit with strings of fairy lights, casting a soft glow over the hedges and flower beds. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the best of me. That's when I heard it, a low, urgent whisper, followed by a stifled laugh. I froze, my heart pounding. The voices were coming from the far end of the terrace, just beyond the rose arbor. I told myself to turn back, to give whoever it was their privacy, but something pulled me forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. I moved quietly, my heels sinking into the grass. As I rounded the corner, I saw them, Mark and Olivia, standing close together in the shadows. At first, I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe Olivia was upset and Mark was comforting her. But then I saw the way his hand cupped her cheek, the way she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. I saw the way their bodies pressed together, the way their lips met in a kiss that was anything but innocent. For a moment, the world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I felt as if I'd been punched, the air knocked out of my lungs. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not with them. I wanted to scream, to run, to tear them apart. But I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. I watched as Mark whispered something in Olivia's ear, his hand sliding down her back. Olivia giggled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. They were so wrapped up in each other, so oblivious to the world around them, that they didn't even notice me standing there. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind: Mark's late nights, Olivia's lingering glances, the way they always seemed to find each other in a crowded room. Suddenly, it all made sense. The pieces fell into place, forming a picture I'd refused to see. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to me, to Ethan, to our family? I stumbled backward, desperate to escape before they saw me. My hands shook, my vision blurred with tears. I made it back to the ballroom, the noise and light overwhelming after the darkness outside. I pressed myself against the wall, struggling to breathe, to think, to hold myself together. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to wake up and find it had all been a nightmare. But it was real. The truth was undeniable, seared into my memory like a brand. I felt exposed, raw, as if everyone in the room could see the betrayal written on my face. I caught sight of Ethan, laughing with friends, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just outside. My heart broke for him, for the happiness that was about to be destroyed. I tried to compose myself, to wipe away the tears before anyone noticed. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. Should I confront them? Should I tell Ethan? Should I pretend I hadn't seen anything, at least until the wedding was over? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I slipped into the ladies' room, locking the door behind me. I stared at my reflection, searching for answers in the red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. I felt like a fool, like I'd been living in a fantasy while the truth festered just beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make the pain stop, but I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. I had to hold it together, at least until I figured out what to do. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and forced myself to smile. I told myself I could get through the rest of the night, that I could pretend for a few more hours. For Ethan's sake, for my family's sake, I would keep the secret at least for now. When I returned to the ballroom, Mark was back at our table chatting with my parents as if nothing had happened. Olivia was across the room, her arm linked through Ethan's, her face the picture of innocence. I felt a surge of anger, a burning need to expose them, to make them pay for what they'd done. But I bit my tongue, forcing myself to play the part of the dutiful wife and loving sister. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I danced, I laughed, I smiled for the cameras, all the while feeling like I was watching someone else's life. Every time I looked at Mark, I saw his hands on Olivia, his lips on hers. Every time I looked at Olivia, I saw the betrayal in her eyes, the secret she was hiding behind her smile. I barely remember the speeches, the cake cutting, the final dance. I was numb, moving through the motions on autopilot. When the time came to say goodbye, I hugged Ethan a little tighter, holding on to the brother I loved, the brother I was about to hurt. As Mark and I walked back to our hotel room, the silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to make him explain how he could do this to me. But the words caught in my throat, choked by fear and heartbreak. I lay awake for hours, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let myself be so blind. The next morning, everything felt different. The sunlight streaming through the window was harsh, unforgiving. Mark acted as if nothing had happened, as if our lives hadn't been shattered the night before. I watched him get dressed, watched him kiss my cheek, and felt a wave of disgust. I wanted to scream, to tell him I knew, to make him admit the truth. But I stayed silent, trapped by my own fear and confusion. I spent the day in a daze, replaying the scene on the terrace over and over in my mind. I tried to convince myself that I'd misunderstood, that there was some innocent explanation. But the image of their kiss haunted me, a constant reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. I knew I couldn't keep the secret forever. Sooner or later the truth would come out, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. But the worst wasn't just the betrayal, it was what happened next. The morning after the wedding, the world felt strangely silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, illuminating the chaos of discarded clothes and half-packed suitcases. Mark was already up, humming softly as he scrolled through his phone, acting as if nothing had happened. I watched him from the bed, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and disbelief. How could he be so calm, so normal, when my entire world had just collapsed? I wanted to scream at him, to demand an explanation, to force him to admit what I'd seen. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy with the weight of secrets. I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up, unable to move forward or back. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Mark and Olivia, lost in each other, oblivious to the destruction they'd left in their wake. Breakfast with the family was torture. The dining room buzzed with laughter and stories from the night before. Ethan was glowing, his arm draped around Olivia, who played the part of the perfect new wife. My parents beamed with pride, already talking about future grandchildren and family holidays. I sat at the edge of the table, picking at my food, barely able to swallow. Every smile, every toast, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I kept glancing at Mark, searching for some sign of guilt or remorse. But he was the picture of composure, charming my mother, joking with my father, slipping seamlessly into the role of devoted husband. Olivia, too, was flawless, her laughter light, her eyes bright, her hand never far from Ethan's. I wondered how she could look at me, how she could sit across from me and pretend nothing had happened. The betrayal was so complete, so intimate, that I felt like I was suffocating. I excused myself as soon as I could, fleeing to the sanctuary of my hotel room. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed, the tears finally spilling over. I sobbed until my chest ached, until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left but emptiness. I felt humiliated, foolish for not seeing the truth sooner, for trusting people who had so easily betrayed me. The hours crawled by. I ignored Mark's texts, ignored the knocks at the door, ignored the world outside. I replayed every moment of the wedding, every conversation, every glance, searching for clues I'd missed. I wondered how long it had been going on, how many times they'd lied to my face, how many memories had been tainted by their deceit. I thought about Ethan, about the happiness I'd seen in his eyes, the trust he'd placed in both of us. The thought of shattering his world was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. I was torn between the urge to protect him and the need to confront the truth. If I told him, I would destroy his marriage, his faith in the people he loved most. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit in their lies, forced to watch as they built a life on a foundation of deceit. Isolation became my refuge. I avoided the family gatherings, the post-wedding brunches, the endless stream of well-wishers. I told everyone I was feeling unwell, blaming exhaustion and a headache. In reality, I couldn't bear to face them, couldn't bear to pretend that everything was fine. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. The humiliation was overwhelming. I felt exposed, as if everyone could see the truth written on my face. I imagined the whispers, the pitying glances, the judgment. I wondered if anyone else knew, if I was the last to discover the secret that had been festering beneath the surface. The thought made me sick. I tried to distract myself, to lose myself in books, in television, in anything that would keep my mind from circling back to that moment on the terrace. But nothing worked. The pain was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to swallow me whole. I started to question everything: my marriage, my friendships, my own judgment. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? Was I not enough? Was there something wrong with me? The doubts multiplied, feeding on my insecurity, eroding what little confidence I had left. But even in my isolation, I couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. The world kept turning, the family kept celebrating, and I was left alone with my pain. I felt invisible, irrelevant, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. Yet in the quiet moments, a new feeling began to stir: anger. Anger at Mark, at Olivia, at myself for letting it happen. Anger at the injustice of it all, at the way they'd stolen my happiness and left me to pick up the pieces. The anger was sharp, cleansing, a spark in the darkness. I realized I couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, I would have to face them, to make a choice about what came next. I would have to decide whether to protect my brother or to protect myself, whether to keep the secret or to let the truth come crashing down. I thought I was alone in my pain, but I was wrong. The weight of the secret grew heavier with each passing hour, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I tried to convince myself I could handle it alone, that I could carry the burden without letting it destroy me, but the pain was too much. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would listen without judgment, who would help me make sense of the chaos swirling inside me. I called Julia, my oldest friend, the one person who had seen me through every heartbreak and triumph. My voice trembled as I asked her to meet me at the little cafe we'd frequented since college. She didn't hesitate, sensing the urgency in my tone. When I arrived, she was already there, her eyes wide with concern. I barely made it to the table before the tears started. Julia reached across, squeezing my hand, her presence a lifeline in the storm. I told her everything, every detail, every fear, every moment of doubt that had led me to that night on the terrace. She listened in stunned silence, her expression shifting from disbelief to outrage to fierce protectiveness. "How could they?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How could they do this to you?" "To Ethan?" I shook my head, unable to answer. The betrayal felt even more real, more raw, now that I'd spoken it aloud. Julia hugged me tightly, promising I wasn't alone, that she would stand by me no matter what. Her support gave me the strength I needed to do what I'd been dreading. That night, I waited for Mark to come home. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock ratcheting up my anxiety. When he finally walked through the door, I was ready. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, heart pounding so loudly I thought he must hear it. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He looked surprised, then wary. "About what?" "About you and Olivia," I replied, watching the color drain from his face. For a moment, he tried to deny it, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But I held his gaze, refusing to back down. The truth was written all over his face: guilt, fear, shame. He finally broke, his shoulders slumping as he admitted what I already knew. "It just happened," he muttered, unable to meet my eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far." "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. He hesitated, then whispered, "A few months." Since the engagement party, the words hit me like a physical blow. All those family gatherings, all those moments I'd trusted him, trusted her, they'd been lying to my face the entire time. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. "Why?" I choked out. "Why her? Why my brother's wife?" Mark shook his head, searching for an answer he couldn't find. "I don't know. We just connected. It was a mistake, a mistake." The word echoed in my mind, hollow and meaningless. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, over and over again, to betray me, to betray Ethan, to destroy everything we'd built. I couldn't listen to another excuse. I grabbed my keys and drove to Ethan and Olivia's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't know what I was going to say, only that I needed to see her, to look her in the eye and demand the truth. Olivia answered the door, her smile fading when she saw my face. I pushed past her, my anger boiling over. "How could you?" I spat, my voice raw. "How could you do this to me?" "To Ethan?" She tried to deny it at first, but the truth was impossible to hide. Tears welled in her eyes as she confessed, her words tumbling out in a rush. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone, that she'd been confused, lonely, swept up in something she couldn't control. I didn't believe her. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she tried to twist the story to make herself the victim. I told her exactly what I thought of her, of Mark, of the lies they'd spun. The argument exploded, voices rising, accusations flying. Years of resentment and jealousy spilled out, things we'd never dared to say before. In the end, there was nothing left but silence. Olivia collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, while I stood over her, shaking with rage and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. But I didn't. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring through my tears. I didn't know what to do next, how to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. All I knew was that I couldn't keep the secret any longer. Ethan deserved to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I was terrified of what would happen, of how it would change everything, but I couldn't protect him from this. Not anymore. But when my brother found out, everything changed. I had always thought of Ethan as the gentle one, the peacemaker, the brother who would do anything to avoid conflict. Even as kids, when I'd get into scraps at school or arguments at home, Ethan was the one who smoothed things over, who made everyone laugh, who found a way to bring us back together. That's why, as I drove to his house with the truth burning in my chest, I imagined his reaction would be quiet devastation, a broken heart, a silent retreat, maybe even a desperate plea to keep the family together at any cost. But I underestimated him. I underestimated the strength that had always been there, hidden beneath his easy smile and gentle words. I called him first, my voice shaking as I asked if we could talk. He heard something in my tone, something urgent, something final, and told me to come over right away. When I arrived, he was waiting on the porch, concern etched deep into his features. Olivia was inside, oblivious to the storm about to break. We sat together on the steps, the night air thick with the scent of rain. I tried to find the words, but they caught in my throat. Ethan reached for my hand, his touch steady and warm. "Whatever it is, just tell me," he said softly. So I did. I told him everything what I'd seen at the wedding, what Mark had confessed, what Olivia had admitted when I confronted her. I watched the color drain from his face, watched his hands clench into fists, watched the hope in his eyes flicker and die. For a moment I thought he might collapse, that the weight of it would crush him. But then something changed. His jaw set, his eyes hardened, and I saw a side of my brother I'd never seen before. He stood up abruptly, pacing the porch, running his hands through his hair. "How long?" he demanded. "Since the engagement party," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, fighting for control. When he opened them again, there was a fire there, a resolve I hadn't expected. "I need you to stay," he said. "I need you with me." I nodded, unsure what he meant, but willing to do anything he asked. He disappeared inside, and I heard his voice calm, cold, commanding, calling Olivia into the living room. I followed, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. Olivia appeared, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan stood in front of her, his posture rigid, his voice steady. "Is it true?" he asked, his words slicing through the silence. She hesitated, glancing at me, searching for an escape. But there was none. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "How could you?" he asked, his voice breaking just a little. "How could you do this to me?" "To my sister?" Olivia tried to explain, to justify, to beg for forgiveness. But Ethan held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't want your excuses," he said. "I want the truth, all of it." She confessed then, the whole sordid story, how it started, how it continued, how she'd convinced herself it didn't mean anything. I watched Ethan's face as he listened, saw the pain etched into every line, but also the strength that was building beneath it. When she finished, he turned to me. "Call Mark," he said. "Tell him to come here, now." I did as he asked, my hands shaking as I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. I told him Ethan wanted to see him, that it was urgent. He hesitated but agreed. While we waited, Ethan called our parents. He told them to come over, that there was something they needed to hear. His voice was so calm, so controlled, that they didn't question him. Within the hour, the living room was filled with our family, my parents, Mark, Olivia, and me. The air was electric, charged with anticipation and dread. Ethan stood in the center of the room, commanding everyone's attention. He looked at Mark, then at Olivia, then at our parents. "I want everyone to hear this," he began, his voice clear and unwavering. "There's been a betrayal in this family. Olivia and Mark have been having an affair. It started months ago, before the wedding, and it's been going on ever since." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face turned red with anger. Mark stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Olivia sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. Ethan didn't flinch. He turned to Mark. "You were my friend, my brother-in-law. I trusted you with my family, with my heart. And you threw it all away for what? For a fling? For a lie?" Mark tried to speak, but Ethan cut him off. "Don't. I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you to leave now." Mark looked at me, pleading, but I shook my head. There was nothing left to say. Ethan turned to Olivia. You made vows to me. You promised to love me, to be faithful, to build a life together. Was any of it real? Olivia sobbed harder, but Ethan's face was stone. I want you out of this house. Tonight. My parents tried to intervene to calm things down, but Ethan wouldn't be swayed. No, he said firmly. This ends now. I won't let this poison stay in my life, in our family. The confrontation was brutal, raw, and public. There was no hiding, no pretending, no sweeping it under the rug. Ethan forced everyone to face the truth, to acknowledge the damage that had been done. He refused to let anyone minimize it, refused to let anyone protect the betrayers. As Mark gathered his things and Olivia packed a bag, the silence in the house was deafening. My parents wept, torn between their children, their loyalties shattered. I stood by Ethan's side, my heart breaking for him, but also swelling with pride. He had faced the truth head-on, refusing to let shame or fear dictate his actions. When the door finally closed behind Mark and Olivia, Ethan turned to me. For a moment he looked so lost, so broken, that I wanted to gather him in my arms and promise everything would be okay. But then he straightened, wiping away his tears, and I saw the strength in him again. No one could have predicted what he'd do next. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, whispered conversations, and slammed doors. Our family, once so close-knit and proud of its unity, was suddenly fractured in ways I'd never imagined possible. The news of the affair spread quickly, first among immediate family, then to aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends. Each retelling seemed to add new layers of shock and disbelief, as if no one could quite accept that something so ugly had happened in the heart of our family. My parents were devastated. My mother, who had always prided herself on keeping the family together, was inconsolable. She alternated between sobbing in her bedroom and storming through the house, demanding to know how this could have happened under her roof. My father, usually so calm and measured, was silent and withdrawn, his disappointment radiating from him like a cold wind. I caught him staring out the window for hours, lost in thought, as if searching for some way to turn back time. Ethan moved through the house like a ghost, his grief simmering just beneath the surface. He refused to talk about Olivia, refused to answer questions, refused to let anyone comfort him. He spent long hours at work, coming home late and leaving early, determined to outrun the pain. I worried about him constantly, afraid that the betrayal had broken something inside him that could never be repaired. But the chaos didn't stop there. The rest of the family quickly took sides, each person convinced they knew who was to blame. Some blamed Mark, calling him a snake, a homewrecker, a man who had never truly belonged. Others blamed Olivia, accusing her of seducing Mark, of betraying Ethan, of destroying the family's happiness for her own selfish desires. A few, to my shock, even blamed me, whispering that I must have driven Mark away, that I should have seen the signs, that I had failed as a wife and a sister. The accusations stung, each one a fresh wound on top of the ones I already carried. I tried to defend myself, to explain that I had been just as blindsided as everyone else, but the words fell on deaf ears. People saw what they wanted to see, believed what made them feel safest. It was easier to blame me than to accept that the people they loved were capable of such betrayal. Not everyone turned against me. Some relatives reached out with words of comfort and support, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that I was loved no matter what. My cousin Rachel called every night just to check in, to listen, to remind me that I was stronger than I felt. My Aunt Linda sent flowers and a note that simply read, "You are not to blame." Those small gestures meant more than I could say, tiny lifelines in a sea of judgment and pain. But the pressure was relentless. My parents wanted me to forgive Mark, to try to salvage the marriage for the sake of appearances. "People make mistakes," my mother pleaded. "You can't just throw away 8 years." My father, though less vocal, made it clear he expected me to keep the family's reputation intact to avoid any public scandal. Their words felt like a betrayal of their own, as if my pain was less important than the family's image. Ethan, for his part, refused to speak to Mark or Olivia. He cut them out of his life completely, blocking their numbers, returning their letters unopened. He told me he never wanted to see them again, that they were dead to him. I understood his anger, his need to protect himself, but I worried about the toll it was taking on him. He was losing not just a wife, but a future he had built in his mind, a future that had been ripped away in an instant. Old wounds resurfaced, too. Arguments that had lain dormant for years erupted anew, resentments over childhood slights, jealousy over parental favoritism, bitterness over past mistakes. Every family gathering became a minefield, every conversation a potential explosion. I found myself dreading the phone's ring, dreading the next confrontation, the next accusation, the next tearful plea for forgiveness. I tried to be the peacemaker, to hold the family together as I always had. But I was exhausted. The burden was too heavy, the pain too raw. I realized for the first time that I couldn't fix this, not for Ethan, not for my parents, not for anyone. The damage was too deep, the wounds too fresh. In the midst of the chaos, I began to question everything I thought I knew about my family. Were we ever really as close as I believed, or had we just been pretending all along? Was our unity real, or was it just a fragile illusion, shattered by the first real test? As the days turned into weeks, the divisions only deepened. Some relatives stopped speaking to each other altogether, while others clung more tightly to their chosen sides. The family I had always relied on felt like a stranger to me, a collection of broken pieces that no longer fit together. Could our family survive this? There comes a moment, after the shock and the anger and the endless questions, when the pain simply becomes too much to bear. For me, that moment arrived in the quiet darkness of my childhood bedroom, the one place I'd always felt safe. I had retreated there after another exhausting day of arguments and accusations, seeking refuge from the chaos that had consumed my life. The walls were still covered in faded posters and old photographs, reminders of a simpler time when family meant comfort, not conflict. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling utterly hollow. The betrayal had seeped into every corner of my world, poisoning even my memories. I couldn't escape it, not in my parents' house, not in my own home, not even in my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face twisted with guilt, Olivia's tears, Ethan's haunted expression. I heard the harsh words, the slammed doors, the whispered blame. I felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me, suffocating me. I tried to remember who I was before all of this, before the lies, before the heartbreak, before my family became a battlefield. I used to be strong, confident, sure of my place in the world. I used to believe in love, in loyalty, in the unbreakable bonds of family. Now all I felt was lost. The loneliness was overwhelming. I had never felt so isolated, so misunderstood. Even the people who tried to help Julia, Rachel, my Aunt Linda, couldn't reach the part of me that was truly hurting. They offered comfort, but I couldn't accept it. I was too ashamed, too angry, too broken. I pushed them away, retreating further into myself, convinced that no one could possibly understand what I was going through. I thought about leaving, just packing a bag and disappearing, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. The idea was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I imagined a new city, a new job, a new life free from the shadows of betrayal. I imagined waking up one morning and not feeling the ache in my chest, not dreading the next phone call, not flinching at the sound of Mark's name. I imagined freedom, but then the guilt would return, sharp and relentless. How could I leave Ethan when he needed me more than ever? How could I abandon my parents, even if they didn't understand? How could I walk away from the life I had built, the person I used to be? The questions circled endlessly, trapping me in a cycle of despair. I stopped answering calls, stopped responding to messages. I let the world shrink down to the four walls of my room, the only place I felt invisible. I barely ate, barely slept. I wandered through the days in a fog, numb to everything but the pain. I wondered if I would ever feel whole again, if I would ever trust anyone, even myself. One night, as rain tapped against the window, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, searching for the woman I used to be. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, my shoulders slumped under the weight of grief. I didn't recognize myself. I pressed my palms to the glass, desperate for some sign of hope, some spark of the strength I'd always prided myself on. That's when the anger returned, not the wild, destructive anger that had fueled so many arguments, but a quieter, fiercer kind. I realized I was tired of being a victim, tired of letting other people's choices define me. I was tired of waiting for someone else to save me, tired of apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I was tired of feeling powerless. I thought about everything I had survived, every heartbreak, every disappointment, every time I'd picked myself up and kept going. I thought about Ethan, about the way he had stood up for himself, refused to let the betrayal destroy him. I thought about the people who still loved me, who believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. Slowly, determination began to replace despair. I realized I didn't have to let this be the end of my story. I didn't have to let Mark and Olivia's choices define my future. I could choose to fight back not for revenge, but for myself, for the life I deserved, for the woman I wanted to be. I wiped away my tears, straightened my shoulders, and took a deep breath. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't stay trapped in this darkness forever. I owed it to myself to try, to hope, to believe that healing was possible. But then, I found a reason to fight back. It's strange how, when you finally decide to stop running from the pain, you start to see things more clearly. The world sharpens, the fog lifts, and the truth, no matter how ugly, becomes impossible to ignore. That's what happened to me in the weeks after I hit rock bottom. I stopped hiding. I started asking questions. And with every answer, I felt a little bit stronger. It began with Ethan. He and I had always been close, but the betrayal had drawn us together in a way I never expected. We became each other's lifeline, sharing long, late-night conversations that were equal parts grief and grit. He told me about the nights he couldn't sleep, the days he couldn't eat, the moments when anger threatened to swallow him whole. I told him about my own darkness, my doubts, my fear that I'd never be whole again. We promised to help each other heal, no matter how long it took. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, Ethan turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, determined, almost fierce. "I don't want to be a victim," he said quietly. "And I don't want you to be one either. We deserve answers. We deserve the truth." His words lit a fire in me. For so long, I'd been content to let the pain wash over me, to accept the story I'd been given. But now I wanted more. I wanted to know why Mark and Olivia had done what they did. I wanted to know if there was something I'd missed, some warning sign I should have seen. I wanted to reclaim my story. I reached out to Julia, my steadfast friend, who had never once wavered in her support. She was more than willing to help, her loyalty as fierce as ever. Together, the three of us began to piece together the puzzle, combing through old messages, social media posts, and memories that suddenly took on new meaning. It didn't take long for the first secret to surface. Julia, ever the detective, noticed that Mark's work trips had always coincided with Olivia's girls' weekends. At first, I'd thought nothing of it, just a coincidence. The kind of thing you don't question when you trust someone. But now, with fresh eyes, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Ethan and I confronted Mark separately, pressing him for details. At first, he tried to deflect, insisting that the affair had been a brief, regrettable mistake. But when we presented him with the evidence, hotel receipts, text messages, photos, he broke down. The affair had started long before the engagement party. It had been going on for nearly a year. The revelation was a gut punch, but it also brought clarity. I realized that the betrayal hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated, ongoing deception. Mark and Olivia had lied to us, to themselves, to everyone. They had built their relationship on secrecy and manipulation, and we had been their collateral damage. But the secrets didn't stop there. Julia, relentless in her pursuit of the truth, dug deeper. She discovered that Olivia had been in contact with an old boyfriend during the early months of her relationship with Ethan. There were emails, late-night phone calls, even a few clandestine meetings. It became clear that Olivia had a pattern. She craved attention, validation, excitement. She was never satisfied, always searching for something more. Ethan was devastated, but also strangely relieved. "It wasn't about me," he said one night, his voice steady. "It was never about me. She was always looking for the next thrill, the next secret. I just got caught in the crossfire." For the first time, I saw my brother not as a victim, but as a survivor. He refused to let Olivia's choices define him. He started going to therapy, joined a support group, and even began running again, something he hadn't done since college. I watched as he rebuilt his life, piece by piece, and I felt inspired to do the same. With Julia's encouragement, I started to reclaim my own agency. I met with a lawyer, began the process of separating my finances from Mark's, and started looking for a new place to live. I updated my resume, applied for jobs I'd always been too afraid to pursue, and even signed up for a painting class, something I'd loved as a girl but had abandoned in adulthood. Each small step felt like a victory. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to do next. I started to see myself not as a victim, but as a woman with choices, with power, with a future. The more I learned about Mark and Olivia, the less I blamed myself. Their affair wasn't about me or Ethan or anything we had done wrong. It was about their own emptiness, their own inability to be honest with themselves or anyone else. That realization was both painful and freeing. I could let go of the guilt, the shame, the endless self-doubt. But just as I began to feel whole again, Julia uncovered one last secret one that changed everything. She found a series of emails between Mark and Olivia, sent just days before the wedding. In them, they discussed not just their feelings for each other, but their plans for the future. They talked about money, about moving away, about what they would do if the truth ever came out. There was even mention of a hidden bank account, one that Mark had opened without my knowledge. The discovery was a shock, but it was also a turning point. I realized that I had been living in the dark for far too long, letting other people control my story. Now, I had the power to shine a light on the truth, to take back what was mine, to fight for the life I deserved. What I discovered changed everything. The moment Julia showed me those emails, something inside me snapped into focus. I was done being the one who suffered in silence while others moved on as if nothing had happened. I was done letting Mark and Olivia's lies dictate the course of my life or Ethan's. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that cut through the fog of heartbreak and confusion. It was time to take control. It was time to fight back. Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table late into the night. The evidence spread out before us, printouts of emails, bank statements, text messages, and notes from Julia's research. We were no longer just siblings bound by pain. We were partners in a mission for justice. The more we talked, the more determined we became to protect ourselves and our family from further harm. Our first step was legal. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, bringing every piece of evidence I had. She listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with each new revelation. "You have a strong case," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for divorce, but for financial restitution. The hidden account, the infidelity, the deception, it all matters." For the first time, I felt the law was on my side, not just a distant threat wielded by others. Ethan, too, sought legal counsel. He wanted to ensure Olivia couldn't claim any more from him than she already had. He was determined to protect what was left of his savings, his home, and his peace of mind. Together, we mapped out a strategy documenting everything, keeping meticulous records, refusing to be bullied or manipulated. But justice wasn't just about the courts. It was about reclaiming our voices, our dignity, our right to the truth. We decided to confront Mark and Olivia together, not in anger, but with the calm confidence that comes from knowing you're in the right. We invited them to meet us at a neutral location, a lawyer's office, with witnesses present. No more secrets, no more whispered accusations. Everything would be out in the open. The confrontation was tense, but I refused to let fear or shame silence me. I laid out the evidence piece by piece, watching as the color drained from Mark's face and Olivia's bravado crumbled. Ethan spoke with a quiet authority I'd never seen before, making it clear that we would not be manipulated or guilted into silence. "You made your choices," he said, his voice steady. "Now you'll face the consequences." We didn't stop there. With the help of our lawyer, we froze the hidden account, ensuring Mark couldn't drain it before the divorce was finalized. We notified the appropriate authorities about the financial deception, protecting ourselves from any future surprises. Every step we took was deliberate, measured, and rooted in the knowledge that we deserved better. Emotionally, the process was exhausting. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under again. But every time I faltered, Ethan was there to remind me why we were doing this, not for revenge, but for justice, for closure, for the chance to build a future free from lies. We also made a pact to support each other, no matter how ugly things got. We checked in daily, celebrated small victories, and reminded each other of our worth. Julia remained our steadfast ally, offering advice, encouragement, and the occasional much-needed distraction. Together, we formed a new kind of family, one built on honesty, resilience, and mutual respect. As word of our actions spread through the family, the dynamic began to shift. Some relatives who had doubted us before now reached out with apologies and support. Others, still clinging to old loyalties, kept their distance. But it didn't matter. We were no longer seeking approval or validation from anyone but ourselves. The most important part of our plan was reclaiming our own narratives. We refused to let Mark and Olivia's betrayal define us. We spoke openly about what had happened, not to shame or embarrass, but to break the cycle of silence that had allowed so much pain to fester. We encouraged others in the family to speak their truths, to confront their own wounds, to seek healing instead of hiding. Through it all, I felt myself growing stronger. I was no longer the woman who cowered in the shadows, afraid of what people might think. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman determined to protect herself and those she loved. They thought we'd stay silent. They were wrong. The day of the family gathering arrived with a heaviness that settled over me like a storm cloud. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday lunch, an attempt by my parents to restore some sense of normalcy, to bring everyone together and pretend, if only for a few hours, that we were still a family. But Ethan and I knew better. This was the moment we had been preparing for. The moment when the truth would finally come out in the open. With no more secrets, no more hiding, I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest, clutching the folder of evidence that had become my shield. Ethan was already there, his jaw set, his eyes clear. We exchanged a silent nod, a promise that we would stand together. No matter what happened, the house filled quickly, my parents bustling in the kitchen, aunts and uncles laughing in the living room, cousins chasing each other through the hallway. Mark arrived alone, his face tight, avoiding my gaze. Olivia came a few minutes later, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The tension was palpable, a current running beneath every polite greeting and forced laugh. Lunch was a strained affair. Conversation skittered across the surface, never touching anything real. My mother tried to keep things light, but her hands shook as she passed the dishes. My father barely spoke, his eyes fixed on his plate. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on me, the unspoken demand to keep the peace, to let the past stay buried. But I was done pretending. When the plates were cleared and the coffee poured, Ethan stood up, his voice cutting through the chatter. "There's something we need to talk about," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He looked at me and I nodded. I stood, my hands trembling only slightly as I opened the folder and laid the evidence on the table: emails, bank statements, photographs, messages. The truth in black and white for everyone to see. "I know this is difficult," I began, my voice steady, "but it's time for everyone to know what's really been happening. Mark and Olivia have been having an affair. It started long before the wedding, and it's been going on ever since. They lied to all of us and they tried to hide it, but the truth always comes out." A gasp rippled through the room. My mother's face went white, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's fists clenched on the table. The aunts and uncles exchanged shocked glances, while the cousins stared in wide-eyed disbelief. Mark tried to speak, but Ethan cut him off. "Don't," he said, his voice cold. "We have the evidence. We know about the hidden bank account, the secret meetings, the lies. You betrayed us. Both of you." Olivia's composure shattered. She burst into tears, pleading for forgiveness, insisting it had all been a terrible mistake. But no one moved to comfort her. The room was frozen, the air thick with anger and hurt. Alliances began to shift in real time. Some relatives who had doubted me now looked at me with new respect, their faces softening with sympathy. Others turned on Mark and Olivia, their voices rising in outrage and disbelief. My mother wept openly, her dreams of family unity crumbling before her eyes. My father stood, his voice shaking with fury as he demanded answers from Mark, from Olivia, from anyone who would listen. Mark tried to defend himself, but every word only made things worse. He blamed stress, loneliness, even me, anything to avoid taking responsibility. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the room was no longer willing to accept excuses. Ethan spoke again, his voice strong. "We're not here to destroy anyone. We're here because we deserve the truth. We deserve respect, and we deserve to heal, even if it means letting go of people who hurt us." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Olivia's sobs and Mark's quiet, desperate apologies. The family was divided, some siding with Ethan and me, others unable to process the betrayal, clinging to denial or misplaced loyalty. Old wounds reopened, old arguments reignited, and the house that had once been filled with laughter now echoed with pain. But through it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out. The burden of secrecy had been lifted. I was no longer alone in my pain, no longer forced to carry the weight of other people's choices. I looked at Ethan, and he nodded, a silent acknowledgement of everything we had survived together. As the gathering broke up, people left in small, somber groups. Some hugged me tightly, whispering words of support. Others avoided my eyes, unable to face the reality of what had happened. Mark and Olivia slipped out quietly, their heads bowed, their futures uncertain. I stood in the doorway, watching the last car pull away, feeling both empty and strangely free. The family I had known was gone, replaced by something rawer, more honest. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. But the fallout was just beginning. After the storm of that family gathering, the world felt eerily quiet. The house, once filled with the noise of arguments and accusations, now echoed with a different kind of silence, a heavy, contemplative hush, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The truth was out, the lines had been drawn, and there was no going back to the way things were before. All that was left was to move forward somehow through the wreckage. For Ethan and me, the days that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and difficult conversations. Divorce proceedings began in earnest, each step a painful reminder of what we'd lost, but also a necessary act of self-preservation. I sat across from Mark in a sterile office, our lawyers shuffling documents between us, the finality of it all settling in my bones. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to demand answers he could never give. But mostly I just felt tired of fighting, tired of hurting, tired of pretending that love could fix what had been so thoroughly broken. Ethan's process was no easier. Olivia moved out, leaving behind a trail of memories that seemed to haunt every corner of his home. He boxed up her things in silence, each item a small betrayal, a reminder of the life he'd imagined and the reality he now faced. But he didn't let the pain consume him. Instead, he focused on rebuilding one day at a time, one small victory at a time. He started running again, pouring his grief into miles of pavement, letting the rhythm of his feet carry him toward something like healing. Our parents struggled too. My mother, so used to being the glue that held us together, found herself at a loss. She apologized for the things she'd said, for the pressure she'd put on me to forgive and forget. My father, quieter but no less affected, began to reach out in small ways, a cup of tea left on my bedside table, a gentle squeeze of my hand as I passed by. We were all learning how to be a family again, this time without illusions. The wider family was slower to heal. Some relatives drifted away, unable to reconcile the truth with the image they'd always held of us. Others drew closer, offering support and understanding in ways I never expected. Rachel and Julia became my lifelines, their daily check-ins a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I was still loved, still worthy, still me. Trust, though, was harder to rebuild. I found myself questioning everything, every word, every gesture, every promise. I wondered if I would ever be able to let someone in again, to believe in love without reservation. The thought of starting over was daunting, the idea of opening my heart to someone new almost unthinkable. I watched Ethan struggle with the same fears, both of us tiptoeing around the possibility of hope, afraid to be hurt again. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. I found comfort in small routines, morning coffee on the porch, long walks with Ethan, laughter with friends. I started painting again, losing myself in color and texture, rediscovering a part of myself I'd long neglected. I took a new job, one that challenged me and reminded me of my own strength. I learned to enjoy my own company, to find peace in solitude rather than fear. Ethan, too, began to open up. He joined a support group, made new friends, and even started dating tentatively, cautiously, but with a sense of hope I hadn't seen in him for months. We talked often about trust, about forgiveness, about the possibility of happiness after heartbreak. We promised each other that we wouldn't let the past define us, that we would keep moving forward, no matter how slowly. There were setbacks, of course. Nights when the loneliness crept in, when the memories felt too heavy to bear. Days when anger flared unexpectedly, when the unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm us. But we faced those moments together, refusing to let them pull us back into the darkness. As the months passed, the chaos faded, replaced by something quieter, more resilient. Our family was smaller now, but stronger in its honesty. We learned to celebrate the good days, to forgive ourselves for the bad ones, to trust that healing was possible even if it didn't look the way we'd imagined. And yet, in the quiet moments, a question lingered in the back of my mind, persistent and unanswerable. Could I ever trust again? In the aftermath of so much loss, I never expected to find anything resembling hope. Yet, as the seasons changed and the sharp edges of betrayal softened, I began to notice small, unexpected gifts blooming in the cracks left behind. It was as if, in losing so much, I'd made space for something new to take root. It started with the simplest things. Julia, who had always been my confidant, became something more, a true partner in healing. She invited me to join her book club, a quirky group of women who met every other Thursday in a cozy corner of the local coffee shop. At first, I was hesitant, afraid I'd be the odd one out, the woman with too much baggage. But the group welcomed me with open arms, their laughter and warmth a balm to my wounded spirit. We talked about books, yes, but also about life, about heartbreak, about starting over. I realized I wasn't alone in my pain. Everyone carried scars, and sharing them made us all a little stronger. Ethan and I, too, found our way back to each other, not just as siblings, but as friends. We started a new tradition, Sunday morning hikes, just the two of us, winding through the woods in companionable silence or easy conversation. Sometimes we talked about the past, sometimes about the future, but mostly we just enjoyed the comfort of each other's company. The bond we'd always shared was different now, deeper, forged in fire and forgiveness. We learned to lean on each other without shame, to celebrate each other's victories, no matter how small. Through Julia's book club, I met people I never would have crossed paths with before. There was Priya, who had left an unfaithful husband and started her own bakery. Marisol, who had survived cancer and now volunteered at the animal shelter. And Grace, who was raising 2 kids on her own after her partner walked out. Their stories were different from mine, but the threads of resilience and hope wove us together. We became each other's cheerleaders, confidants, and sometimes the family we chose for ourselves. I began to rediscover parts of myself I'd long neglected. I painted again, filling canvases with color and emotion, letting my hands express what words could not. I took a weekend pottery class, laughing at my lopsided bowls and crooked mugs, proud simply to be creating something new. I started running with Ethan, our breathless laughter echoing through the early morning air. Each small act of self-care felt like a rebellion against the darkness, a declaration that I was still here, still capable of joy. Work became more than just a distraction. It became a source of pride. I threw myself into new projects, volunteered for challenges I would have shied away from before. My boss noticed, offering me a promotion and the chance to lead a team of my own. For the first time in years, I felt confident, capable, and excited about the future. As I grew stronger, I found myself opening up to new possibilities. I started saying yes to invitations, yes to new experiences, yes to the idea that happiness might still be possible. One evening, at a friend's birthday party, I met someone, Alex, a friend of a friend, with kind eyes and an easy smile. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flutter of hope. We exchanged numbers, and as I walked home that night, I realized I was smiling genuinely, effortlessly, without fear. Ethan noticed the change in me, and I saw it in him too. He was dating again, cautiously but with an open heart. We teased each other about our awkward first dates, shared stories of new connections and old insecurities. We promised to keep each other honest, to remind each other that we deserved love, not the kind that demanded we shrink ourselves, but the kind that celebrated who we truly were. The old wounds were still there. Of course, some days they ached more than others. But they no longer defined me. Instead, they became reminders of how far I'd come, of the strength I'd found in the ashes. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed, but the woman who had survived, who had rebuilt, who had learned to trust herself again. As spring turned to summer, I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and felt a quiet sense of peace. My life was not what I had planned, but it was mine, messy, beautiful, and full of possibility. And as I glanced at my phone, a new message from Alex lighting up the screen, I couldn't help but wonder what new beginnings might be waiting just around the corner. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has changed. There was a time when I thought betrayal would break me, that the pain would swallow me whole and leave nothing behind but bitterness and regret. But as I stand here now, on the other side of that darkness, I see things differently. I see a woman who survived, who learned, who grew stronger with every step she took away from the people who tried to diminish her light. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it is not the end of the story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that pain can be a powerful teacher. It strips away illusions, forces you to confront truths you might have ignored, and if you let it, shows you just how resilient you really are. I learned that I am not defined by what others do to me, but by how I choose to respond. I learned that forgiveness is not about excusing the unforgivable, but about freeing myself from the weight of anger and resentment. I learned that it's okay to fall apart, to grieve, to feel lost. Healing isn't linear, and there were days when I doubted I would ever feel whole again. But with time, and with the support of people who truly cared, I found my way back to myself. I discovered new strengths, new passions, and new dreams. I realized that the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another, and that sometimes, the life you build after heartbreak is more beautiful than anything you could have imagined before. I also learned the importance of boundaries, of saying no to people who don't respect you, of standing up for yourself even when your voice shakes. I learned that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but of courage. And I learned that vulnerability is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. It's what connects us, what makes us human, what allows us to truly heal. If you're reading this and you've been betrayed, please know that you are not alone. Your pain is real and it matters. But so does your strength. So does your hope. So does your future. You are more than the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are worthy of love, of respect, of happiness. You are allowed to start over, to dream again, to trust yourself even when it feels impossible. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, who remind you of your worth, who see the best in you even when you can't see it yourself. Take small steps, celebrate small victories, and be gentle with yourself on the hard days. Remember that healing is not about forgetting what happened, but about choosing to move forward anyway. I am not the same woman I was before my world fell apart. I am stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I have learned to let go of what I cannot control and to embrace the possibilities that lie ahead. I have learned that my story is still being written, and that I get to decide how it unfolds. If you've ever been betrayed, you're not alone. There is life after heartbreak, and it can be beautiful, messy, imperfect, and full of hope. Trust yourself. You are braver than you know, and your best chapters may be yet to come. Months have passed since the day everything changed, and life has settled into a new, gentler rhythm. The pain that once felt so sharp has faded, replaced by a quiet strength I never knew I possessed. I wake up each morning with a sense of gratitude, not for what happened, but for what I've discovered about myself in the aftermath. There is a lightness in my step, a softness in my heart, and a hopefulness in my spirit that I once thought was lost forever. Ethan and I are closer than ever. Our Sunday hikes have become a cherished ritual, a time to check in, to laugh, to dream about the future. He's found peace in his own way, pouring his energy into work, friendships, and new adventures. He's even started seeing someone, a kind, thoughtful woman who makes him smile in a way I haven't seen in years. Watching him open his heart again has been one of the greatest joys of my healing. We both know that trust is something rebuilt slowly, but we also know that love, in all its forms, is worth the risk. As for me, I've learned to embrace the unknown. I still paint, filling my home with color and life. I still meet with Julia and the book club, our laughter echoing through the coffee shop, our stories weaving together in a tapestry of resilience. I've taken on new challenges at work, finding fulfillment in growth and the respect of my colleagues. And yes, I've let myself be open to new connections. Alex and I are taking things slow, savoring each moment, letting trust and affection grow naturally. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. Our family, though changed, is healing. My parents have learned to let go of old expectations, to accept us as we are flawed but fiercely loyal. We gather for dinners, for birthdays, for quiet evenings filled with stories and forgiveness. The wounds are still there, but they no longer define us. Instead, they remind us of how far we've come and how much we've overcome together. Sometimes I catch myself thinking back to that day at the wedding, the day my world fell apart. I remember the shock, the heartbreak, the sense that nothing would ever be right again. But now, with the gift of perspective, I see it differently. That day was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with growth, with courage, with unexpected joy. If there's one thing I hope you take from my journey, it's this. Sometimes the worst day of your life is the start of your best chapter. We don't get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose how we respond, how we heal, and how we move forward. The future is unwritten, and it belongs to those brave enough to claim it. So here's to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the future we choose together, stronger and free.